Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So, today we're going to talk about foreign languages and an old Army training film and what we can learn from it. I speak a few languages, and when I hear somebody struggling in English, I will switch to their native language if I know it. Maybe I speak that language better than they speak English, and it can aid in communication. This is something that I think activists and especially academics really need to pay attention to, because at times, I see it a lot, where people refuse to speak the language of those they're talking to. If it doesn't matter how well your argument is constructed, if the person you're talking to doesn't understand the basic terminology you're using, it's not going to go anywhere. Sometimes, to get a point across, it might be better to speak their language, so to speak. Even if that means using terminology that in your circles is no longer used, or maybe slightly reinforcing what may seem to be reinforcing a negative concept to weed out a much more negative concept. Now, years ago, like 15 years ago, I saw this Army training film, and it was ancient then. It was set right after Vietnam, and I think that's when it was made. I'm sure the first copies of this were on reel-to-reel. But it's a film designed to help a new lieutenant talk to his troops and kind of get the lay of the land. Now, what you need to know before I start talking about this is that a second lieutenant walking into the Army, the very first day he reports for duty, he outranks men that have been in for 15 years and seen combat. So there's a gap. There's a knowledge gap. Now, a good first sergeant will train his officers without them ever knowing it, but that takes time. This is that first day. And that first day, in walks that lieutenant. He's holding nothing but his orders and a Bible, because he is the all-American boy. And as he's walking into the building, some of his troops see that. That's important in a minute. He goes inside, and he winds up talking to the captain. And the captain's giving him a list of stuff he needs to do, and kind of offhandedly says to somebody else that the first sergeant is not real receptive of a new grenade launcher the Army's getting. The Army's getting the M203, and he still likes the M79. And the lieutenant, he's like, well, I was trained on the 203. I'll go talk to the first sergeant and explain, the specs on it to him. And the captain, being a apparently funny man, kind of looks at him and was like, yeah, go do that, Now, what you need to know, if you know nothing about the military, and I don't want to overstate the importance of the first sergeant, but he's God. He is God within that company. So the idea of any second lieutenant explaining anything to a first sergeant is funny to start with. And they play this up. The first scene is second lieutenant walks in, and there's the first sergeant sitting at his desk, squirreling his coffee, does a good job of showing his ribbons, and he's got a rack of them. And on top of it, he's got a CIB with a wreath and 2 stars. In English, that means this man has been around. He has seen some things, okay? The implication was that he was in Vietnam and Korea. And there's a second lieutenant. He's like, see, here are the specs on it. It's objectively a better weapon. It's going to make us more effective in combat. More effective in combat, huh, son? You know a lot about combat? First sergeant sets his coffee down, walks out of his own office. Conversation is over. Nothing is accomplished. Second scene. They reset it. Lieutenant walks in. Hey, Top, I'm new to the company. You were in Vietnam, right? So we're getting the M203. How would you have used that during Vietnam? How would you have used that, you know, with the benefits and the drawbacks of it? How would you have used that because it's not in the manuals yet? Well, it is useful to have that soldier holding his rifle and a grenade launcher at the same time. And he starts to explain how he'd use it. And at the same time, he's convincing himself, unintentionally, that maybe it's not such a horrible device. You know, statistics and specifications, they can get to facts. Sometimes a little bit of fiction can get to the truth. Something we might want to keep in mind. After that, he starts working through the list. Second lieutenant, and the first task on it is that he's got to give a briefing to his platoon on VD. That's STDs. So, scene one. He walks in and he starts giving the briefing. And everybody's just kind of rolling their eyes. What does this guy know about it? He came walking in with a Bible. And here he is, first day on the job, telling us not to do what we, as soldiers of the time, like to go do. Complete failure. No communication. Second scene. He goes back to that first sergeant. Hey, who's been to the medic the most for VD? The first sergeant laughs. He's like, well, that'd probably be Corporal Clapp. And so they call in Corporal Clapp and they give him the training materials. And he goes and gives it. And everybody's laughing because he has stories. He has a way to relate it. He speaks the same language. And most importantly, he's the right messenger. Sometimes it may not be that you're constructing a poor argument. It may be that you're just not the person that can deliver it to the audience. I had a lot of people ask me why I didn't say anything about toxic femininity. Number one, I can barely say the word. I sound like Trump trying to say anonymous. Number two, I'm not the right messenger. Why on earth would anybody listen to me on that subject? Now that film was 40 years ago. It was probably when it was made, maybe 50. But it still holds a lot of truth. The way something is presented is oftentimes more important than the information presented in it. Now, I know that's not good. That's not the way things should be, but it's the way things are. Think about the recent incident with the kid in the Make America Great hat and the native. The way that was presented initially, it looks one way. The way it was presented as more and more viewpoints came out, it changed. It altered. That's why you got to be leery about jumping on any viral video right out of the gate, because there's always more to it. Now, the more you look at it, the Catholic schoolboys are not the heroes of that story by any means. But it may be possible that the little smirking kid, despite that look on his face, he may not have been the villain either. It's one of those things we're probably never going to know, because it looks, when you watch multiple viewpoints, it looks like there's a whole lot of stuff that happened there where one group thought it was somebody else that said something. And that while the whole thing was blown out of proportion, the reaction wasn't, because of the message, because of the language used when it was first circulated. And it created this flurry of memes, and most of them are of the same vein. They are propaganda more than anything. I loved watching people I knew uh, that I watched share memes glorifying the police response at Standing Rock. All of a sudden, sharing memes talking about, how could they dishonor this native? Yeah, where were you when when they were getting hit with tear gas? um, Messaging is important, and the way things are perceived a lot of times can be more important than the facts as far as the reaction that it generates. And it's just something that we need to be conscious of, especially if we are in a battle against fake narratives, fake emergencies. If we're fighting that, we can't succumb to the same things. Anyways, just a thought. Y'all have a good night.